Hi there guys, Tom Quayle here. Hope everybody's doing very well out there as ever. So today I'm going to be starting a new series for my YouTube channel. I'm going to be uploading one of these videos a month, and this is all about how, why, what I practice when I'm trying to get better at the guitar. It could be things to do with improvisation, things to do with technique. It could be anything really, but hopefully useful information for you guys as to the specifics of some of the things that I practice to get better at this instrument. Now for this first lesson, or first practice session or information, we're going to be talking about how I visualize chord tones on the guitar when I'm improvising or when I'm practicing to improvise. Now, chord tones are the absolute core of how you want to learn to improvise over chord changes. No matter whether you're talking about the simplest of chord changes, where you're in a single key and you're just outlining the chords in that key, or whether you're dealing with even the most complex of fusion and jazz compositions where you're playing over very, very complex chord sequences. The same general practice or practices apply in terms of how you think about and manage the information on the fretboard. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about how I practice to be able to visualize, hear and see chord tones all over the fretboard. Okay, and this is going to stand you in incredibly good stead for being able to visualize and play over pretty much any chord sequence you're going to find yourself playing over. For this particular video, I'm going to be utilizing my app Solo because it's such a good way of cataloging and organizing our practice here, and it allows us a confirmatory tool that's going to tell us when we're getting the stuff right, visualizing and playing these chord tones correctly. You absolutely, as I've mentioned in a few of my lesson videos before where I have used Solo, you do not need the app to get the most out of this video. The difference is that you're going to have to do all of the cataloging and mapping out of the material. You're going to have to retain it in your mind and make sure that you're getting it right because you don't have a confirmatory tool to tell you when you're doing so. Without further ado, let's jump into this. We're going to be thinking not about positional playing or about kind of visualizing large shapes. I want to show you an efficient way that you can utilize each of the fingers on the left hand as starting points to visualize and catalog all of the different chord tones, thirds, fifths and sevenths, all the different types of chord tone that will come up on the fretboard in a very efficient way that's going to enable you to practice and develop all of this information in a way that you can access it very quickly and manipulate it in real time. So let's dive in, zoom in on the fretboard and get going. Okay, let's get started here. So what we're going to be doing is essentially mapping out all of the basic chord tones that we could ever need for playing over all the standard chord types that we would want to be or would encounter when we're playing over chord changes. So what we're going to do is we're going to be mapping out thirds, fifths and sevenths because those are the general chord types that we're going to come across, or the chord tones that we're going to come across. Generally it's going to be either a flat third or a major third, flat 3 or 3. It's going to be a flat 5, a 5 or a sharp 5, okay, depending on the chord type, or it's going to be a flat 7 or a 7. So we need to be able to play all and find, of course, all of those intervals within one octave, ascending and descending from a given root note on the guitar. Because if we can play them within one octave, provided we can find the root note anywhere on the fretboard, we should be able to then play the arpeggio that we need for that particular chord, or find all of the relevant chord tones surrounding that root note, ascending or descending through one octave. And of course, if we can do it through one octave, we can ascend through multiple octaves to play larger structures. What we don't want to do is map out large structures as a giant shape like this, and then get stuck and limited by that because it's very hard to manipulate. I've talked about this on my channel before. So how are we going to do this? How are we going to tackle this? Well, as I mentioned before, I'm going to be using Solo for this to organize our practice material. You absolutely don't need to, of course, I've already mentioned that. The reason I'm using Solo is A, because I think it's a brilliant practice tool. Of course I would, because I was one of the creators of it, but I also think that this is a fantastic way of organizing practice material for you guys, and it also confirms when you're getting things correct. That's really, really important if you're at the stage where you're not 100% sure that the note that you're playing is the third, for example, or the flat third, or the sharp 5, or whatever. If you think you might be getting it wrong, Solo will let you know that you've not played the right note, which is super, super important. Okay, so the way we're going to do this is we're going to think about starting with the root note from each finger on the left hand. The traditional way of doing a lot of this stuff is to think in positions. I'm not going to do that. Okay, you can do that later down the line. I see that as being slightly more advanced actually and slightly more challenging for most players. What we're going to do is we're going to position the root notes for each of the chord tones that we're going to work on one of the fingers of the left hand, starting with the first finger, then the second, then the third, and then the fourth. Generally, the third and fourth will net you very similar results, but you'll see this as we go along. Okay, so I'm going to go into solo and I'm going to come into the changes trainer here, because that allows us to practice playing over chord changes. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select a basic major 2-5-1 chord progression in a single key. We're going to just be dealing with a standard 2-5-1 in the key of C, which is the chords D minor 7 to G7 to C major 7. We're going to be finding chord tones over this basic chord sequence. You can use any chord sequence, no matter how simple or complex it is. You could even work with one chord to start with, okay? So long as you're able to map out the intervals that are required or the chord tones that are required for that chord or chord sequence, you can do this. The great thing about solo is it's going to map those chord tones out for you, okay? It's going to tell you which chord tones it wants you to find, and then it's going to tell you whether you've got them right or not. Okay, so once I've selected it, in this case a basic major 2-5-1, I'm going to come into the level here and I'm going to select root and third. Okay, solo is going to ask me to find both the root note and the third for each of the chords in this sequence, D minor 7, G7 and C major 7. Okay, so at this point what I'm going to do is I'm going to start the workout. It's going to repeat round and round and round this chord sequence. There we can see D minor 7 and it's asking me for the root note and the flat 3. It's a minor third in this case. Solo knows it's a flat 3. Okay, if you're not using solo, you have to know that information. It's pretty basic information to know it's a root and a minor or flattened third. Okay, here's the deal with the way we're going to practice. I'm going to put my first finger on the root note at this point. We're going to start with the first finger and it's going to be placed on the root note. So in this instance, I'm going to go for the lowest D I can find on the fretboard here at the 5th fret of the A string. That's my root note. I'm going to play it. Solo's going to go, yep, that was the root note. See there, it actually recognized the D and went, yep, you've played the root note, I'm going to grey that out. Okay, if you're not using solo, you're going to have to just know that that's a D and be sure you've got that right, okay? Fairly basic to do, of course. Now, using this first finger as the root, I'm going to have to find the flat 3 physically. Where can I play it within 1 octave ascending? And I can find it at the 8th fret of the A string. This is the flat 3, okay? Now I could find the flat 3 at the 3rd fret of the D string as well, but because I'm using my first finger for the root note, I can't reach back physically. We're talking about the physical makeup of the guitar here. This is how we're going to catalogue where we can play these chord tones against the root note. So I'm going to physically play the flat 3 with my little finger here, or my 3rd finger, depending on how far I want to stretch. So here's the flat 3. Look at the shape it makes, 1 to flat 3. Now you see there that solo catalogued that and said, yep, that was correct. You played the flat 3. I'm going to move on to the next chord. If I'd played a different interval, it wouldn't have moved on, okay? Now again, it wants me now to find the root note for G7, G, of course, and then it wants me to play the major third, or 3 in this case. So I'm going to find the lowest G I can find on the fretboard with my first finger, here at the 3rd fret of the low E. And again, my job is to find within 1 octave ascending, where can I play the major third? Well, I can play it at the 7th fret of the E string. I can't really reach it anywhere else within 1 octave ascending because I can't play it here at the 2nd fret of the A string because I'd have to physically move my finger back. Now, of course, in real life, when you're playing, you can do that. This limitation that I'm setting here is to enable us to limit ourselves to where we can physically find this third when we're starting, or any chord tone, of course, whether it be the 5th or the 7th, relevant to the chord, when we're starting with the root note on the first finger. Okay, so I'm going to play 1 to 3. Here's the 1. Again, notice solo catalogue that. If I played the flat 3 by mistake, of course, if you're not using solo, you're going to have to make sure you don't do that. Solo's going to not move on because that's not the right third. Here's the third. Look at the physical representation of that interval. Listen to the sound it makes. Dum, bum. Okay, play it physically and then listen to it as well. And then we're going to move on. So first finger on C in this instance, C major 7, that triangle means major, the 7th, so C major 7. I'm going to play the 1, the lowest C I can find. with the first finger again, then I'm going to locate that major third. Of course, the shape is the same as it was for G because it's still a major third. Okay? Now, I've gone right the way through the chord sequence. If your chord sequence is longer, go all the way through the chord sequence, finding the relevant thirds, starting on that with the root note on the first finger. Okay? I've come back round. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to find all of the places on the guitar that I can put the root note and utilize my first finger for that root note. So here's another D. Let's do it here. 1 to 3. Flat 3 in this case. 1, flat 3, 1. Always starting on the first finger. 3. Let's do it from here. 1, flat 3. Here's a G. Again, it would be there for you guys, but because of my weird tuning, it's here for me. This is a G. 3, 1 to 3. Okay, let's go for this D up here. Again, 15th fret for you guys. 1 to flat 3, 1 to 3, 1 to 3. Always with the first finger on the root note. Okay, 1, flat 3, flat 3, 1, 3, 1, 3. Okay, now when you've done that, what we're now going to do is we're going to do exactly the same exercise, but starting on the second finger of the left hand with the root note. Always ascending, always within 1 octave, okay? So, in this instance, if I put my second finger on the D here, this lowest D on the guitar, I'm going to play it again. Solo's recognized it. Again, if you're not using solo, just make sure you get this right. Now, at this point, it's a bit of a stretch to grab this flat 3 here, so I'm going to try and locate it somewhere else, and I can find the flat 3 at the 3rd fret of the D string. Now, it might take you ages to work that out, okay? How you work that out is entirely up to you, okay? Just so long as you get the right answer. And of course, the great thing about using solo is it's going to tell you whether you've got the right answer. If you play the wrong note, it's not going to move on until you get that flat 3. Now, look at the shape it makes. 1 ascending to flat 3 within 1 octave. Okay, make sure you catalog that shape, right? Now we're going to do the same thing starting on the second finger for G. 1, and the 3 is here at the 4th fret. Now let's do the same thing for C, second finger, starting on the root note. There's my 3. Go all the way through the guitar, playing all of the root notes for each of these chords, and play with the second finger and find the relevant third. 1 to flat 3, 1, 3, 1, 3. Second finger is on the root note, then I ascend to the third. Okay, 1, flat 3, 1, 3, 1, 3. 1, flat 3. Again, your shapes will differ because of standard tuning. I'm in all fourths tuning. That doesn't matter. You just need to catalog these, various chord tones on the guitar. 1, 3, and then 1, 3. Now, of course, do the same thing ascending, starting on the 3rd finger, and you'll find the result is almost entirely the same. 1, flat 3, 1, 3. I can use my second finger for the 3 here. 1, 3. Which will be there for you guys. Same thing, I'm going to go all over the fretboard. 3rd finger, 1, flat 3, 1, 3, ascending 1, 3. Okay, now when I've gone through and I've done all of the 4 fingers on my left hand ascending within 1 octave, the obvious next thing to do is to again go through each of the fingers on the left hand starting on the root note, but descend, if possible, to the relevant chord tone, in this case the 3rd. Okay, so you can run into some problems here, not problems, but some things you need to think about. So if I put my first finger on this D here, let's start with that first finger on the root note. There is physically no way for me to grab the flat 3 descending, going down to the flat 3 of this chord, or the minor 3rd. I can't physically reach it. It's actually this note here, down here, this F, okay? But there isn't an F that I can get to. If that's the case, just play the ascending version for now. So 1 to flat 3 ascending. Okay, this G here, well, if I put the first finger on the G, I can descend physically down to the major 3rd of this chord, 1 to 3. See there that solo recognized that I played the 3. If I'd played this G here with the first finger, there's no way of descending down to the major 3rd. I've run out of range and strings on the guitar. So again, I would have ascended to the major 3rd instead, okay? Because we want to be able to find the 3rd, ascending or descending from every position, well, not position, but every finger on the guitar when our root note, our first finger's on the root note, second finger, third finger, fourth note are all on the root note. Now I'm going to continue through. So here's my C. I'm going to descend down to the major third for this chord. 1 to 3. Okay? Again, I'm going to do this all over the guitar. 1, first finger on the root note, down to flat 3. 1, down to 3. 1, down to 3. Always starting with the first finger on the root note. I'm then going to do the same thing starting on the second finger. So let's grab this D here with the second finger, just arbitrarily. 1, down to flat 3. Let's grab this G, 1, second finger, down to 3. 1, down to 3. Or do the same thing all over the fretboard. Now with the third finger and the little finger, we get a different setup. So if I start with my little finger, let's say on this D here, 1, I can now grab the descending flat 3 down here. Okay, then little finger or third finger, whichever one you're working on the root note, descend down to the 3. I can no longer grab this 3 here. Physically, it's impossible for me to do it without shifting my hand. Now again, in real life, when you're improvising, you are totally free to do that. This is a physical limitation I've placed on your practice in order that we're going to, find every permutation of each of these chord tones from a given root note. So 1, down to 3. 1, down to 3. Do that all over the guitar. 1, flat 3. Little finger on the root. 1, 3, 1, 3. So on and so forth. Okay, so we've now done the ascending major and minor third, or 3 and flat 3, from every single finger on the left hand, ascending and descending within 1 octave. There shouldn't be a single chord that you would come across now where no matter which finger you have on the root note, you cannot find the relevant third ascending or descending within 1 octave. Super powerful, okay? Now, that might take you weeks of practice. It might take you a few hours, depending on what level you're at. What you would now do is you would come into solo, or if you're not using solo, you would just mentally do this. You would select root and fifth. Repeat the process using the root and the fifth. Start with your first finger on each of the root notes and ascend to the fifth. So 1 to 5. First finger on the root note. 1, 5. 1, 5. Do this all over the guitar. 1, 5. 1, 5, 1, 5. 1, 5, 1, 5, 1, 5. Ascending. Now put your second finger on the root note. 1, 5, 1, 5. It's the same shape, different fingering. 1, 5. Okay, now put your third or little finger on the root note. Now, this is a big stretch now, so I'm going to play 1 to 5, 1 to 5, 1 to 5. Slightly different fingering, okay? Repeat this round and round, ascending all over the guitar, ascending from each finger to the relevant fifth up 1 octave. Then, of course, do the same thing, descending from each finger. So 1, 5, 1, 5, 1, 5. Repeat this process over and over again from each finger, just as we've been doing with thirds all over the guitar. When you get good at that, come back in and select root and seventh and do the same process. Start on each finger and find the seventh. 1, first finger on the root, flat 7, and then 1, flat 7, 1, natural 7. Start with the second finger. 1, flat 7, 1, same fingering of course, or same shape I should say, different fingering. 1, 7. Okay, so on and so forth. Now, if you've gone through this process from every single finger, put the root note on every single finger, and then find the relevant third, fifth, and seventh for each of these chord types, work through lots of different sets of chord changes, work through all the different chord types, you should find that there isn't a single chord that will come up. Of course, we've not worked through sus4 chords and some other chord types, but the basic chord types that you will see in jazz, popular music, blues, funk, rock, whatever, there shouldn't be a single chord where if you place any of your fingers on the root note, you can't find all of the relevant chord tones ascending and descending through 1 octave. And at this point, you are not relying on any large shapes, and solo has helped you to work through this and catalogue this information for you. The next step is to come in and start working on all 4 chord tones, including the root note, of course, which is the easy one. We're going to skip over working on just the root 3rd and 5th, or the 3rd, 5th and 7th. We're going to go straight to all 4 chord tones, which you can do here in solo. Now, of course, again, if you're not using solo, just make sure that you're cataloging and mapping these intervals correctly. Okay, I'm going to stick with the major 2-5-1 here. You could work through minor 2-5-1s, you could work through jazz standards, you could work through any chord sequence you like. It might even be a modal chord sequence, or something by your favorite rock band, something in a single key, whatever it is. We're working with these chord tones, okay? Now, in this instance, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start this workout, and now solo is asking, or if you're mapping this out yourself, you're asking yourself for the 1, the 3, the 5, and the 7 relevant to each of these chords, ascending from each finger on the left hand. So I'm going to start with the first finger here. I'm going to put the first finger on the root note and map out each of these intervals or chord tones, or as we call them in the app, intervallic functions throughout these arpeggios. The point here is I'm not playing giant shapes that I get stuck in, and I'm not just playing a physical shape. I'm thinking about each of these chord tones, how they relate to the root notes. So here's the 1, start on the first finger. Here's my flat 3. I've done the work to map out what that looks like and feels like physically. Where can I play it physically? And what does it sound like? 1 to flat 3. Okay, here's my root note to the 5. Solo's ticked that off. Here's my root note again. Where's the flat 7? So that gave me... Okay, now we put the first finger on a G and play 1, 3, 5, flat 7. Put the first finger on C, 1, 3, 5, 7. Do this all over the guitar, start not position based, but starting on the first finger. So 1, everywhere there's a D, everywhere there's a G, everywhere there's a C. Flat 3, 5, flat 7, 1, 3, 5, flat 7. Always starting on the first finger. 1, 3, 5, 7. Okay? Had to do a little position shift there. Okay, so you've mapped out from the first finger, ascending through 1 octave, okay? The great thing about doing this through 1 octave is, say for instance, we now do the same thing starting on the second finger, okay? So we've got 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7. 1, 3, 5, flat 7. 1, again, second finger on the root, 3, 5, 7. Then we do the same thing starting on the 3rd and 4th fingers. So 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7. Let's go to this G here. 1, 3, 5, flat 7. Again, you can see I'm not thinking about positions. I'm just thinking about always starting on the same finger. 1, 3, 5, 7. Now you've mapped out ascending from the root note, from every single finger, what the arpeggio looks and feels like to play. You might be thinking, well, how do I connect these together? Well, of course, if you start on the first finger and you play through 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7, let's say you wanted to continue that arpeggio. Well, the next root note starts on the second finger. Just play the arpeggio starting on the second finger now from this root note. And you can see where those intervallic functions or chord tones are. I can see the 1, then the flat 3, the 1 and the 5. Of course, these shapes are different in standard tuning, and the 1 and the flat 7. Because I've done that work in the prior section where I was mapping out my 3s, my 5s and my 7s ascending. The same thing would happen if you wanted to descend, for example. Descend through the arpeggio starting on the 1. In this instance, if I just come out of here a second, let's say I wanted to start on the first finger and descend through the arpeggio. 1, flat 7, 5, flat 3. Now I do the same thing starting on the G. So 1, start with my first finger, flat 7, 5, 3. Okay, now 1 for the C major 7, 1, first finger again, 7, 5, 3. Solo can do all of this as well. You can descend or ascend through arpeggios, change the order of the intervals. Now, let's say you've gone through this entire process as well. Weeks and weeks, months and months of practice where you are going through and working on each of these arpeggios through 1 octave, ascending and descending from every single finger, paying very close attention to where each of the intervals or chord tones are in relation to the starting point. What you can now do with solo, and of course, again, if you want to do this yourself, you can do this too. Solo just catalogs this for you very well, is you can do the same thing, but start on a different chord tone now. This is really powerful because it gets rid of that root note bias for visualizing and playing through the arpeggio, okay, whilst not relying on these giant shapes. So now, if I start the workout, it's going to start on the flat 3, or the relevant third for each of the chords, okay? So again, do exactly the same process, but start on the first finger and play through the arpeggio, or each of these chord tones, thinking very specifically about where each of these notes is, or each of these chord tones. So, okay, here's my flat 3. I'm going to start on the first finger, and I'm going to visualize each of these intervals as where I can play them. I'm still going to visualize from the root note, but my first finger is on the flat 3 now. So flat 3, there's the root note, then the 5, then the flat 7, and then the 1. Do the same thing for G7. Start with the first finger, 3, there's my root note G, 5, flat 7, 1. Same thing for C major 7, 3, 5, 7, 1. So on and so forth. Now, do the same thing starting on the second finger. So if I start with my second finger on the flat 3, let's say I start here. Okay, so here's my root note D, second finger on the flat 3, 3, 5, flat 7, 1, which would be there for you guys. So on and so forth. Now for G7, start on the second finger. Let's do it here. 3, 5, open string, flat 7, and then 1, open string. Okay, now same thing, second finger on this third here for C major 7, 3, 5, 7, 1. Go through, start on the third finger, then the fourth finger, do this ascending, descending. This should arm you with, no matter where you end up on the guitar, no matter which finger you end up on any chord tone, you can see and find and hear your way through the arpeggio descending or ascending. You're never ever going to get lost whilst looking at thirds, fifths, sevenths, or root notes. Of course, root notes are a given, I would hope, if you're working through this kind of exercise. Again, with solo, you could come in and you could say, okay, well, let's go to the next level here and do, let's do fifth, seventh, root, third. So this is the next inversion, if you like. Start from each finger, work your way through the arpeggio, ascending and descending, starting on the fifth instead of the root or the third. Now do the same thing starting on the seventh. Now what's really cool about some of the stuff that's built into solo is it will actually randomize these inversions for you as well. We have this level here, root, third, fifth, seventh, randomized inversions. So in this instance, it will randomize the inversion that it's asking you to play. So I'm going to do all of these starting on the first finger. So I'm going to play 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7. Now it's asking me to play from the flat 7 and I'm going to choose to ascend. So flat 7, 1, 3, 5. Again, starting on the first finger. Now 1, 3, 5, 7. And then starting on the first finger again. So on and so forth, okay? What you can also do is you can come in and you can select root, third, fifth, seventh, the basic level, and then you can randomize the order of the intervals, okay? Now this is where it becomes very powerful because you can start to really have to negotiate your way through these chord tones and arpeggios without relying on specific ascending and descending shapes. So here we've got the flat 3, okay? I'm going to start on the first finger, flat 3, 5, 1, flat 7, oh sorry, 1, see I got caught out there, flat 7. Now let's start with the first finger on the root note, 1, let's go to the flat 7, to the 5, and then to the 3. And now let's, so on and so forth. You can work your way through, starting on each finger with the relevant first chord tone. When you've done all of this, this is where I would suggest you start getting into positional based playing. Okay, where all of this information and visual prowess that you've armed yourself with will really start to help you in this positional based playing, where you're limiting yourself to say 5 frets, the first to 5th fret, or the 5th to 9th fret, or the 2nd to 6th fret, for example. We go through that in the app, ways that you can utilize that. But this is the approach that I use in my practice when I'm working through either a new set of changes, if I want to really strengthen my chord tone playing. And then when it comes to actually improvising over things, let's say I was going to improvise over Autumn Leaves, for example, something very basic. The chord sequence goes C minor 7 to F7 to B flat major 7 to E flat major 7, A minor 7 flat 5, to D7, to G minor 7, to C to G7. So very basic. There's the sequence. I can see and hear my way through chord tones in this chord progression and construct melodies based off these chord tones, no matter which position or area of the fretboard I find myself in, no matter which finger I find myself utilizing, I can always see the chord sequence. So I can play simple things like So there we go, guys. I hope that gives you a good insight into some of the things that I practice when it comes to visualizing the fretboard, cataloging chord tones, working through arpeggios. I'm really not into working through large structures, working through these giant shapes. You know, they're good for technique practice, but they're not so good for actually improvising and playing through a set of chord changes, no matter whether it's a simple set of chord changes, which sometimes can be harder, to be honest, or whether it's a more complex, perceived complex set of chord changes. That's also how you can utilize solo in your practice. So I hope you enjoyed kind of that overview of how useful it is as a practice tool. Of course, you can totally, as I mentioned many times now, practice without it. But it gives you a bit of an insight into why it's useful for this kind of practice and actually why we created it, because you know, this is how I practice, and I wanted a tool that would enable me to do that in a very structured, confirmatory way, almost like gamifying the process, if you like. So if you do want to check out Solo, of course, you will find links in the description below for the iOS and Android versions. It's out on Android now, of course, as well. Works on all iOS and Android devices if you've got Android version 8 and above, and works on M1 Apple Silicon Macs as well, because they support native iOS apps. Check the links in the description below, and of course go over to the Solo website to check out more information on that. If you want to support me or you want to check out any more of my lesson content, I am going to be doing more of this kind of how I practice material. But if you want to check out any of the video lessons that I've done on legato technique, on visualizing the fretboard, on improvisation theory, jazz theory, kind of fusion improvisation, modal theory, melodic minor harmony, all those kind of things, check my lessons store in link in the description below, as usual. Check that out and you can support me that way, or check out any of the lesson material that's on there. There's lots of good stuff on there. Thanks for everyone who's checked those out in the past. And of course, click the like and subscribe buttons below and hit the bell notification icon to make sure you never miss any more of my content. All right, guys, thanks for watching. I hope you get a lot out of this. Good luck with your practice, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.